2 years or older. Or you have your juvenile bird, which is a Jake. Um, they're the ones who are doing the majority of the calling, and those loud gobbles that we'll get into if you guys were with us on Tuesday. We went over those. That's like the main vocalization a male turkey makes, and in the wild, the tom or the Jake likes to call, and then the hens come to him. So basically, he just likes to get up into a nice open field where he has some food, he has the sun, the breeze, and his fan, and he likes to see everything around him, and he likes to gobble, and he just likes to usually wait for the hens to come to him. That's what the gobble is meant to communicate. Now, when you're turkey hunting, we're reversing that. Usually, you're making the hen or the female turkey noises, and making that tom or that Jake come to you. So it's a little bit like you're reversing nature, which is kind of wild if you think about it. And I believe that's how generally, if you guys have ever seen like an elk hunting video, that's the same concept. So we like to call turkey hunting the poor man's elk hunt in Illinois. So
That's a good description. And in a lot of ways, it's a lot of the same energy. You're very active. You're very mobile. You're trying to communicate with these different animals while also trying to, pinpoint the habitat that they're using and all these different things. But just to kind of reiterate and to summarize, I think that it's a very important concept. If you look at these pictures, you can pretty much instantly tell which ones are the male, especially in the springtime pictures. You can see they're all puffed up, they're strutting, their fan is all spread out, their tail, and they are trying to lure females to them by being showy, by being charismatic, and also by using that vocalization that Adam discussed. So some key behavior and attributes, like we said, a lot of the gobbling activity and a lot of the calling behavior that we're going to focus on is during the spring because that's their primary breeding season. They're going to feed very heavily in the fall. They don't do a ton of gobbling. You can occasionally hear a couple birds gobble if you get kind of an early spring day that maybe in the 60s or something in kind of December or January. If there's a really warm morning, you may get a few birds to lighten up off the roost and start gobbling. But oftentimes that's some of the younger birds. And the more you're around turkey, you'll really start to be able to differentiate between the gobble of an adult tom and the gobble of a Jake. You can almost tell the physiological development is not quite finalized in some of the immature birds, and so when they gobble, especially the younger birds, it has kind of a more high-pitched tone, and it also doesn't have kind of the same volume that some of the adults do.
Vibrato.
There you go. I like that.
The
Yeah.
bass, yeah. And a lot of times you'll also hear when Jakes gobble, it almost like it doesn't finish. Like it's like almost like 3/4 of the
Yes.
way to a full gobble. He'll like just cough or like almost choke on his own, vocal cords, just because he doesn't have that developed yet.
Right. Sure. So now let's talk turkey. Obviously, we started off with gobble. A quick headphone warning: we are going to play vocalizations. And they will go through your computer speakers, and then obviously not for the gobble, but as we progress through the yelp and the cluck and the purr and some of these other different vocalizations, after we kind of play the sound, Adam and I are going to kind of demonstrate how to produce it on a variety of calls, and we'll also talk a little bit about how we use each vocalization in the field. So up first is the gobble. If that doesn't get you excited for spring, Adam, I don't know what will.
Yes, yes, I'm excited.
Yeah. But again, the gobble is a call that's made by males. And so when we're hunting, a lot of times I personally don't even bring a gobble call with me. They have a few different styles. You can also do one with a mouth call. I don't have enough Tylenol on my desk to demonstrate at the moment, but essentially you just blow a streamlined air and shake your head back and forth really fast, and you can kind of produce that vocalization. But again, I don't personally use it a lot because kind of what Adam said, while hunting, we're trying to bring the male to us. And if we're out there gobbling all the time, That is what every other hunter out there is trying to listen for. And especially on public land, that can oftentimes bring a lot of hunters to your location as opposed to turkeys. So don't use it a ton while you're hunting, but that's something that everybody should pay attention to. That's the primary sound you're going to be listening for. When I'm out there turkey scouting, I do not do a lot of looking for tracks, looking for scat. It's all based on hearing. And a lot of times it's getting out the night before and listening to where those birds go up on the roost and start gobbling and trying to identify that location. Up next is the yelp. So I'll kind of start off here with a diaphragm, but the yelp is kind of the most basic turkey vocalization. It's one of those that if you can learn just one vocalization, I would focus on the yelp. It can be used in a lot of different scenarios and with different inflection. And you'll kind of notice as Adam and I play with some of these calls, you can alter the cadence, you can alter the speed of these notes to sound, more agitated or more relaxed. But before we kind of get started, so this is a diaphragm mouth call, and you can see it's essentially got a couple latex reeds with kind of a metal band that holds everything together. And the nice thing about these is they're fairly inexpensive. You can pick up a pack of 3 for usually $6 to $8, pretty reliably. I do have a word of caution. Depending on your gag reflex, I have a pretty bad one. I hope I don't choke while I'm demonstrating this here in a few minutes. But you can take a pair of scissors or a knife and kind of cut some of this outer red material on this specific call and kind of slim that down, because everybody's palate, where this sits in the roof of your mouth, everybody's palate is shaped a little bit differently. And so being able to kind of match it to your mouth is fairly important. But how you'll use this is essentially you're going to put the call in the roof of your mouth, and you're going to place your tongue about halfway on the bottom of the call. If you put the tip of your tongue in the middle of the call, it'll produce more of a whistle. And if you put your tongue too far forward, it'll produce a very kind of raspy hum. But it's one of those things that you just need to play with. And when you first pick one up, I highly recommend getting a single reed. This happens to be a triple reed. A single or double are oftentimes a lot easier to utilize. They don't take as much airflow over the top of this to produce the vocalizations, either on top or under. So I do highly recommend starting with one. Now the biggest difference between a 1 and a 2 or a 3 or 4, depending how advanced you want to get, a single reed oftentimes, again, takes less airflow, but it doesn't have as raspy of a vocalization. It's a little bit more crisp and a little bit more soft. So it doesn't have a ton of volume, but it also doesn't have the rasp. And you may ask, well, why do you need rasp? The nice thing about rasp, and I'll demonstrate here in a second, rasp can really help hide some of your vocal imperfections. And so if you really struggle blowing one of these calls, the raspy calls can really help to just hide some of those imperfections in your notes. So go ahead and make a quick call. This is a good thing to have, not necessarily Gatorade, but when you're using a mouth call, your mouth will dry out quite quick, and you do need some moisture in your mouth to be able to produce it. And so you can see all I'm doing is kind of blowing a single stream of air over the call. And what I really want to highlight is it's not it's not like you're blowing out a candle where it's and your cheeks are puffing out. It's kind of like you're singing or playing an instrument. It's bringing that air up from your diaphragm, and kind of like if you were to, clean your glasses, you do that, where that air comes nice and up from your diaphragm instead of, puffing out your cheeks and just blowing. But you'll notice, watch the way that I utilize my jaw to adjust the inflection of that call. I'm essentially not changing the airflow. I'm blowing consistent air the whole time, and I'm dropping my jaw to produce that kind of yelp at the bottom of the yelp. And so you can see, I'm not changing much of the airflow. It's just adjusting and dropping that jaw to produce that sound. I like to, when you first start, it's oftentimes easier to have kind of a key word that you practice kind of saying, and it helps with A lot of it is muscle memory. Once you figure out how to blow the air from your diaphragm and out, it'll become second nature. But what I say is kiyak, kiyak. And if you go ki, you can almost feel that air come up from your diaphragm and basically roll over the top of your mouth, and your tongue will naturally go straight up to the roof of your mouth when you make that sound. Kiyak. And you can feel that jaw drop. I want to take it over, Adam, with the
Yep.
slate.
Yep. So here we have a slate call. Usually people will call these pot calls or slate calls, just depending on what the material is. This one, in fact, is made from slate. I'll make sure you guys can see that really good there. They come in all sorts of different varieties. You can get aluminum calls, crystal or glass calls, ceramic calls, and they all do the same thing. They just have a little bit different purpose. Like this one right here, a slate call is not weatherproof. So, if this is the only call you have and it happens to, downpour on you while you're hunting, it won't work and you won't be able to make a good vocalization on this until it's completely dry. So I carry two. I carry this slate call and I carry a metal aluminum call just in case. I always, most of the time, get lucky and, get to use this one. But just in case of inclement weather, I do have a second one that is weatherproof.
And not to take over, but that is another advantage of the diaphragm call. Like when Adam starts to demonstrate his calls, you will see it takes a decent amount of hand movement to produce that vocalization. And also, like he said, they don't always work when they're wet. With the diaphragm call, I'm often wearing a face mask that I don't like to wear a tight fitting one. I like to wear one that just kind of drapes over my face. And so I can do this without really making any movement. And it's one of those that's really good for that. So just to kind of piggyback off your topic.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. If you want to master turkey calling, and you don't have to screw around with anything else in your hands other than just your shotgun, the mouth call is definitely learn that and you'd be set with everything.
And if you have dogs, they're gonna love it.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so like Dan said, this does require a little bit of movement. I would say this one's like the middle of the road one. The box call, which we'll get to here in a second, takes the most movement. So these are super nice when you're hunting with like a partner, and then your partner, let's say, is calling, maybe on the tree behind you, and all you have to do is worry about shooting. But yeah, it does take a little bit of maneuvering if you're calling on this and you have to be the one who's shooting the turkey too. So just keep that in mind. But okay, so here, this is how we're going to do the yelp. Sorry, you have a striker here. This is what you basically like a stylist that's going to help you make the vocalization here. And for a yelp, it's kind of like an oval shape, and it gets wispy towards the top end of the oval. So you start with it pressed down a little bit harder, and then it almost turns into kind of like a J hook, like not a complete oval. And I like to keep my ovals smaller than a dime when I'm encountering turkeys. If I'm really trying to locate a turkey, and maybe I haven't heard anything all day, and I'm on top of a ridge, I'm just trying to call out into the void to see if there's anything out there. The bigger the motion you do, usually the louder the call, and that goes the same as with if you're in the center of the call, the louder the call is. So if I did a really big motion right in the center of the call is going to be super loud, which you don't want always, but it does help in some situations. Most of the time I like to stay in that top third of the call. That's kind of where you can make the sweetest, cleanest notes, I would say. And again, I like to keep my ovals smaller than a dime, so just keep that in mind. But basically, this is what it would sound like.
Can you bring your hand up
Yep.
There you go. Yeah. I know it's hard to do. Yeah.
Let's see if you can catch that angle right here. I'll bring if you guys can see right there, that's my ovals, super tiny, and I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on the face of the call. And a big thing to remember is once you start calling on a slate call, don't take the striker and put it to the face and take it off. You guys hear that noise? It's kind of like a clicking noise. Very unnatural. So once you start making the call, just keep the striker connected to the face of the pot call. That way you won't have any slip ups, and you won't sound unnatural, and it'll sound a lot better to the turkey.
Nice. And I just wanted to kind of touch on one more thing before we get into the box call about the diaphragm. You can really control the volume with this. And I'll kind of do a quick demonstration of a very soft yelp, and then I'll kind of increase in volume. And you can see the range and the freedom that this really gives you. And so you really do have kind of a pretty drastic dynamic range. I hope the microphone picked that up and didn't flatten it too much to where the difference was pretty negligible, but it is a pretty stark difference. And it's really impactful when you're hunting to be able to adjust volume. Even like Adam said, he can do it with the slate call. And so oftentimes it's not about the volume, but you can use that volume to make it sound like a bird. Maybe there's multiple birds here. So maybe you do one yelp sequence that's very soft, then you do another one that's really loud, and it might sound like two different birds in that area, which can be very effective.
Yep. And one thing I want to touch on, if you play the audio one more time.
Yep. Oh.
You can really tell right there, that's a real hen that was recorded. You can really tell that she starts really soft and then picks up her tone, which is another key thing for sounding natural out in the woods. Sometimes turkeys like to come in very quietly, and they won't gobble one bit, not once. And you never know if they're around you or not. So starting really softly and going louder is definitely the way you want to do it, because if there is a tom that's really close to you and you start softly, a lot of times that'll trigger a gobble response. And you know at that point to either keep calling quietly or, cut your calling because he's coming in already. If you just start wailing on the call and you're loud right off the bat, you might just scare something off by sounding unnatural at that point.
And we do have one question real quick, Adam. Why are electronic calls not allowed? It's kind of interesting. There are a few species where electronic calls can be used. Turkey is not one of them, and a lot of it comes down to the fair chase aspect, as well as just the population levels of turkey across the state. I don't know if you sat in on Turkey 101, but if you look back in the historical context of wild turkey in Illinois, our populations were basically non-existent in the early 1900s. By the year 1915 or so, there was pretty much not a single wild bird left in the state. And now the population is roughly, I think, 100 to 150,000 is kind of the last estimate I saw. And it took a lot of relocation and a lot of habitat work to really rebuild that population. And that's kind of also why some of the other regulations for turkey are the way they are, where we have to stop hunting at 1 p.m. And so a lot of it is just to allow this population to continue thriving and to maintain that kind of sustainability in it. But like I said, again, there are some species that you can hunt with electronic calls. One that most people are not familiar with in the state of Illinois is deer. You can actually use electronic calls for deer. I don't know that I necessarily would. A lot of those calls are fairly simple to reproduce. And there's a couple like the conservation order snow goose season. You can also use electronic calls there. And the main goal with that season is to really reduce that population. That's a population that is just exponentially grown in the past couple decades, and it needs to be really brought down because it does quite a bit on habitat destruction. And so a lot of it just kind of comes back to the population dynamics and the kind of fair chase aspect of turkey hunting. But great question.
Yep. So now we'll move on to the box call. Basically, there's two parts of a box call. There's the paddle part and then the box, which is where the noise comes from. Again, like I mentioned before, this one does take a fair bit of movement. So usually these are, again, used by if you have partner calling for you, that's behind you or something, so the turkey doesn't see your movement. Or generally, people like to use these as locator calls. Again, like I mentioned, if you're hunting and you're not having much luck, and you just go up onto a high spot, you can call very loudly on these, and the sound travels very far. So again, this is just another tool. I personally I carry one, but I don't know that I've ever really used it. I've used it maybe a couple of times. Um, but yeah, it can be beneficial. It's good for like windy days when it's howling. You can really cut through the wind with these if you call on it loudly. But basically, what you're going to want to do to create a yelp, you take the paddle part, and on both of these, or on both sides, there's kind of a little bit of a rise, or a little bit of a lip. One thing I should mention too is when you buy a box call, they usually come with chalk, which helps create a crisp note, helps with the friction, and it just sounds a lot better when you chalk it. So you want to chalk the back of the paddle here. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's kind of, I have brown chalk, so it just looks brown. And then I also did it on both edges of the box itself. And basically what you want to do is cock the paddle there, down to like the 3 o'clock position, let's say. And basically you just want to just put a little bit of pressure on it, start slow, and then finish a little bit faster. With a little bit of pressure here, just graze it right over that one edge of the box. Not both, because then it'll just make it sound weird, but just one edge here. And you can hold this however you want. I generally hold it like this I'm right-handed, so I'll hold the box with my left hand and go across the front like this. Some people like to hold it like this and bring the paddle towards them. I just find this to be a little bit easier. I'll put the paddle between my 2 fingers there and just, again, graze it right over that front edge. And that's about, I don't know if you guys can tell how loud that is, but that's about as quiet as I can call on this box call, which is pretty loud being inside. So, again, it's just another calling tool. But
It's a great way to get started, honestly.
Yeah, very easy to learn how to call on this, but can make some situations difficult, if turkeys are close and whatnot. But very crisp noise, super easy, and I mean you can buy a box call for like $15-20 and have it for the rest of your life. But be careful, some of these are expensive because they tend to be like more collector items or art pieces. So just you probably don't want to break one of those in the woods, so just be careful.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the box calls is a lot of the sound is a lot of the I'll say the volume is created by the size of that sound box. Adam, if you want to hold it up again.
Yep.
And so they sell a bunch of different sized box calls that have differing sound chamber sizes. I was actually at Field and Stream the other day, and they had one that I swear it was
I saw that
big.
one.
And they
It's
call
like
it
2
like
feet long.
yeah, the Ridge Master, and so it's
Yeah.
designed to produce a very loud vocalization that you can use for locating. But then they also a lot of times sell kind of the standard size like Adam showed, and then a much smaller one that does a
Yeah,
lot
this is probably like about 5 inches long.
Yeah.
Paddle sticks out a little bit, but yeah.
And up next is the cluck. And so the cluck is one of those vocalizations that I don't use a ton, but but when I use it, it is about the most effective vocalization for the moment that I need it. And so when I'm using a cluck, I pretty much exclusively make it with a diaphragm call. Adam may have some differing opinions, but the only real time I use it. Let me go back to a picture real quick just to help illustrate. So if you look at this picture here in the bottom left, you can see that big tom is all strutted out, and it kind of pulls his neck in. And so that's again, we're aiming for headshots with turkey. We're using a shotgun trying to hit that head and neck. And you can see without having that neck extended, you don't have a ton of clearance there to make a nice clean shot. Where a lot of times when you use a cluck, you may get an instant gobble like you see here in the bottom left, or he may just relax his feathers. He may come out a strut and just kind of pop his head up to look around. And that's derived because the cluck is used as a tool to just say, I'm here. I just want to get your attention. And so it's really good when you have that strutting tom that's just not exposing his neck and you need him to just pop it up real quick right before you take the shot. And so it's a very simple call, especially with the diaphragm. And that's really all I do. I know it doesn't sound like the best cluck in the world, but for what I need it to do, it's about perfect.
Yep. So I'll. Yep. So, perfect. Yes. Same exact thing that Dan says. I don't use this one often. It's just something that I like to mix in once in a while with like a calling sequence. But basically, instead of going in a oval onto the face of the call here, it's just one little pop off the.
And how much down pressure are you putting on that stylus?
Very little pressure, and I'm probably putting it at about 60-degree angle and just popping it right off the face of the call. Again, I'm not lifting it off because again we don't want to create unnatural noise, but just pop, reset, pop, reset. I'll show you guys here if you guys can see the mark. It's just a straight little tiny dash down. So if you guys, the nice thing about a pot call is it shows you what kind of shapes you're making. So yeah, again, the yelp, we're gonna want like a J hook, almost like a full oval. The cluck is going to be like one staccato, like it says here, like one little staccato note down, and it's going to be just a straight little dash across the face of the call. It gives you good feedback, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And up next is the kiki. Now, this is one of the calls that I find the most difficult to produce. It really can't be produced on either call that Adam is demonstrating. The majority of people will produce it on a diaphragm. And typically, I really don't use it in the spring unless it's what I consider a Hail Mary attempt. Maybe I've tried communicating with a gobbler. He's locked up 100 yards away and he's just strutting back and forth, gobbling his head off, but he has no interest in committing and coming, that last 50 or 60 yards that I need for him to get inside my effective range. And I've tried, yelping, I've tried cutting, I've tried clucking, and I just can't, get his interest. I may try the kiki. So I'll go ahead and play that vocalization right now. And so I kind of like to call this, it's almost an assembly call. And so oftentimes, especially in the fall and winter, these hens will get in very large flocks, right? Sometimes, 2 to 3 dozen, sometimes I've seen fields with 100 to 150 hens. That is kind of a rare occasion. But when you or some predator comes and disturbs that flock and kind of disperses it, if they want to group up, which is kind of their natural inclination, they will start doing little clucks, and the very young and mature birds will start doing this kiki call, and it basically just says, "Hey, I'm lost. I'm over here. Please come save me." So don't make too much fun of me, but I'll give it a try here. And so again, it's not the greatest, but it still produces that kind of kiki response. And when I do it, especially in the fall, I like to kind of end it with a yelp sequence. And you may notice it's almost, I don't want to say it's rhythmic, but you'll notice whenever I'm using a diaphragm call, and the majority of turkey callers are this way, they will use their mouth. And what we're really doing with our hand, and for me, it's almost just natural. Anytime I'm using a diaphragm, my hand just goes here. But it allows me to really change the way I can throw that sound. And so maybe I'm sitting against a tree, I have some thick cover behind me. I can go that way and throw the sound back, and then go this way and throw the sound forward, and it'll really start to sound like there are birds, behind me. And that's one of the biggest things about turkey hunting is turkeys are very good at knowing where that sound is coming from. And so if you can make that sound, throw behind you instead of becoming right, where you are, that can be very effective.
It's I don't even know how to explain it. Almost scary how well they know where the noise is
Oh,
coming
it
from.
is. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like they know the exact tree, the exact. I don't even know how to explain it, but it's wild
Yeah,
how
their
well they can
spatial
locate.
awareness is very
Yes,
good.
yes.
Now, this is the call I probably use 95% of the time, especially with a diaphragm call. It's fairly simple, fairly easy to produce, and it's arguably the most unaggressive vocalization. It essentially just means content birds. And if you've ever been around turkeys a bunch, you'll kind of hear them just kind of, just little purrs as they kind of feed around. And that's all we're trying to mimic is just these birds are content. And so it's very good if you have an approaching tom, kind of like that scenario I said where maybe he's, 50 to 100 yards away still. I might do some purring just to keep his interest, keep him engaged, as I bring him forward. And now with the purr on a diaphragm, there's a couple different ways you can produce the sound. I find the easiest for me is to utilize my tongue, just as I make a note out. Some people can do it with their lips. I unfortunately cannot, but here's kind of what it sounds like. And it's very good in conjunction with a cluck or with a yelp sequence. And here's what it sounds like on a real turkey. And so you can kind of hear just that soft kind of rolling call. And again, it's just content birds. They're relaxed, they're comfortable. And so it's really good at just kind of reassuring that Tom as he's coming in.
Yes, I agree with Dan. This is probably my favorite call to use as well. Um, it just, yeah, it can really be like the one last little call you need to make for that Tom to come in that extra 20 yards for an effective shot. So, super important one to learn. The way to make it on a pot call, we're going to be kind of following the same stroke as the cluck. So we're going to go straight down, and it's going to be very light pressure. And you're just going to make, instead of one little pop, you're going to drag the striker across the face longer than one little staccato note because you want that consistent, the brrr, the little kind of roll on it. So this is how it would sound. So I'll make kind of one. So I don't know if you guys can see the one on my left here is the cluck. So that's how short I like to keep that. And then this is how long kind of that purr sequence is. It's a lot
And
longer on the face.
and pot calls produce such a good purr. The only reason I don't personally utilize it a lot is because the majority of time when I'm purring, it means I have a bird that's within my what I call my hunting zone. I can see him. I'm trying to work that specific bird, and I do find the purr to be a better sound coming out of the pot call. But for me, I find the diaphragm to be a little bit more convenient when I'm trying to minimize my movement as that bird approaches.
Yes.
Up next is the cut, and this is a very fast and erratic. It's kind of an interesting. And so it's almost essentially just a series of erratic clucks is kind of it's the same way I produce a cluck with the mouth call is the same way I'll produce a cut. And what I like to say is "Kuh," just "Kuh, kuh." And you can if you just practice making that sound with your mouth right now, "Kuh," you will feel that air kind of rise over the roof of your mouth as it kind of comes up your diaphragm. It's not puffing out the cheeks, it's just that. But Adam, if you want to go ahead and demonstrate that real quick.
Yep. I was just answering it. We did have a question in the chat about a state with the most relaxing rules in turkey hunting. I assume you mean like the least rules. Uh, I guess that's hard to answer because every state's going to have different regulations.
In every state, we're obviously from Illinois, so when I look at the hunting regs, I view our regs as fairly complex. There's things I wish were adjusted or I wish were changed. Every state has that same theory. It's the kind of concept, the grass is always greener. I will say there are a lot of states that have a lot higher turkey populations. And so if you're struggling to draw a permit, or maybe you live in very north, Chicago or northern Illinois or even southern Illinois, and you want to go down to, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, Indiana, really all of the Midwest states have very good turkey hunting opportunities and turkey populations too.
Yes. So moving on to the cut though here on the slate call. So again, we're going to be doing kind of like a pop like we did on the cluck, except now we're going to do it a lot more rapid and with harder pressure on the surface. So that's going to sound something like this. Let's see if we can show that. And if you guys can see the patterns on the slate itself, the thicker white lines, that just indicates a lot more pressure. It's just, creating a lot more friction. So that's what really pops that cut and makes it really loud.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, so that kind of wraps up the turkey calling a little bit, and we can certainly go back to it as we kind of move through this presentation. It's kind of designed that way. But what we're really going to do now is go over what a typical day hunting looks like. What are some of the decisions that you're going to have to make? What are some of the strategies that you can implement at kind of what time of day, what weather, and so the majority of turkey hunters, especially if they've been turkey hunting for some time, the majority of people hunt the roost. That's kind of the most effective strategy. It's the easiest way, but it does have a few drawbacks. So we're going to kind of walk through your typical turkey hunting day. So let's say we're out scouting for roosts. I know I'm hunting tomorrow morning. It's, an hour before sunset is when I usually like to arrive at the site that I may be hunting. And again, a lot of times I hunt pretty far from from the parking lot or road. So oftentimes you want to give yourself that flexibility to get back to the area to be able to actually listen for roost or listen for gobbles. But honestly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of my car. I'm going to take my crow call. I will hit it once, and it's basically just a call that goes caw, and that elicits this gobble response. It's what a lot of hunters will call a shock gobble, and it's almost this innate response. If I were to boo and scare Adam, he may gasp and make some kind of noise. That's essentially what the turkey are doing. They can't really control it. It's what we term the shock gobble. Sometimes we'll even produce it if you slam your car door loud enough, or even at the sound of a shotgun. If you shoot one tom and there's another one in the field, that actually may cause him to gobble too. And so we're kind of using that behavior to our advantage to help us locate where these toms are essentially sleeping. And so you can see here in this picture, this is your standard roost. Now this picture happens to be a hen roost. It's not, to me, it looks like it's also in the fall, winter, but that's kind of besides the point. But typically your tom is going to be in a solitary roost by himself, but he will be near hens. He is picking that roost tree for a reason. He's picking that roost location for a reason. And very often it's because he has access to a hen roost that's nearby. So when you're out locating, you can either use an owl call, which basically just goes hoot, 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 or you can even just go try to make it with your mouth, or you can use turkey calls or gobbler calls. But I find the crow call to be very natural. It's something that happens out there. So I don't think they react to it too much.
I think your mic just cut out there, Dan.
Oh.
I still hear you, but you're a little bit muffled.
Am I back?
You're back better there.
Sorry about that. All right, yeah. So again, let's say you arrive at your parking lot, you have an idea of where some birds might be. So what we're looking for are large chunks of mature timber. They don't like to be in very, young growth. They want to be able to get elevated and to be up in large trees. So I'm trying to find some large forested areas. Now, when you're out there the night before, what I like to do is kind of triangulate their location because I can certainly say they're in that direction. It sounds like they're 500 yards away. I will tell you from experience, there are a lot of times where you think a gobbler is over here because it sounds like the vocalization's coming from over here, but in fact it's over here and it's maybe hitting a ridge and then that sound is coming back to you. And so I like to personally try to locate from a few different spots. And so that will kind of allow me to kind of triangulate where it is. And so I'll go out there, hit the crow call, hear a gobble, walk a couple hundred yards in one direction that I think is getting me a little bit closer, but not too close. I like to stay roughly 300 to 400 yards away from a roost so I don't disturb them. Because if you do, then they're not going to be there the next day, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose of roosting them. So I just try to triangulate where they are. Any thoughts on that, Adam?
No, I do the same exact thing. Like Dan said, it's important to try to get like at least two spots so you can actually figure out where they are because the deception sometimes of where the gobbles come from, it can play mind tricks with you, and sometimes you'll hear ghost gobbles. You
Yeah.
know, sometimes, yeah, like in the middle of the night and during turkey season, I'll be laying in bed thinking I hear gobbles. So it could definitely play with you, play with your mind. So just be sure, try to, like Dan said, triangulate the position.
And we kind of harp on this a little bit, but I find finding a roost important, but it is not the only strategy I use. And we kind of touched on this a little bit in Hunting 101. The majority of turkey hunters will stop turkey hunting at about 9:30, 10 o'clock. A lot of people focus on hunting that roost. And I find that to be, I think you're putting yourself at a disadvantage right off the bat. Vast majority of turkeys I've harvested, almost all of them, but maybe one or two, was harvested between 10:30 and about noon. And a lot of it makes sense, right? So we mentioned that Tom is picking that location for a reason. He's got hens there. Very commonly, it is going to be very difficult to convince that Tom to leave 5 or 6 hens that he's roosted nearby maybe a couple days in a row to try to come check out you. Chances are he's going to go mingle with them, maybe breed with them in the morning, and then at about 10 o'clock, that's when he's going to start expanding his range, start looking for other hens that he can breed. And I find that to be the most successful. So if you're struggling to find, roost sites and you're just not getting a response, you don't have to freak out. I promise. But a couple things to know about the roost. When you're out there locating and you finally think you've kind of triangulated where he is, try to keep an open mind and look at some of the terrain features that are out there. Is there ditches? Is there fence lines that you can kind of use to guide your approach to make sure you're in the cover of forest or terrain, so that as you approach your setup and begin setting up decoys, that they don't see you. Oftentimes you can booger a hunt pretty quick by just unfortunately not planning the entire process, and a lot of that, especially for turkey hunting the roost, is that approach. I personally, again, everyone's comfort level is a little bit different. I personally do not use any flashlights during turkey season. They have very good eyesight, and I want to limit my detection as much as possible. And so I personally don't use a flashlight. Occasionally, if I'm crossing a creek or something and I want to make sure I have good footing, I might click on a red light. A very dim red light can be very effective.
Yeah, usually, just quick note on that. I agree with the no headlamp. I walk in with one for the majority of the walk, but if I know I'm like within the last stretch of where I'm going,
Sure,
that's where I
sure.
shut it down. And if you are going to plan on hunting the roost and you're going to want to be close, uh, make sure you have enough time. It's sometimes hard to prepare what time, sunrise is this time of year. So generally, if I know I'm going to be hunting a roost site specifically that morning, I like to be set up and under the tree that I'm sitting under, like probably an hour before sunlight. That, of course, also gives you a lot of time. You're walking in the dark. if you crack some sticks and stuff, just take your time, be patient, walk slow. That last 100 yards, 200 yards, or whatever it is to get to the tree you want to sit under is the crucial part. So just really take your time and make sure you have enough time to go slow.
Definitely. And I kind of want to highlight this bottom bullet here. Try to sound like another animal walking. So many of us, I am notorious for this. I try to walk as quiet as possible. Try not to make any noise when you're out there. And I think a lot of times that puts us at a disadvantage. We're taking a little bit longer just to do a normal walk. What I like to do is just mimic what a natural animal sounds like. They don't walk at a very consistent pace like humans do. Humans, we pick one speed and we pretty much walk that same speed until we get to our destination. Animals don't do that. They may walk for 15 seconds. They may stop and feed for a few minutes. They may start moving again, stop. And so I honestly do this when I'm walking into especially when I get close. I want to just sound like whatever other critter is walking around on the forest floor. When these turkeys are on the roost, they're hearing stuff constantly. There's squirrels running around, rabbits, frogs, deer, coyote, you name it. There's all kinds of stuff making ruckus in the woods. So you want to minimize the unnatural sound. So if you have metal clanking on your back or your keys are kind of jingling in your pocket. Those are the kind of things to really stay away from. And like Adam said, the big noises like stepping on a twig or a big log.
That brings me to a good point that you just brought up. If you guys are going to be hunting with a box call, make sure to put a glove, like a black jersey glove on, or like just a gardening glove with a hair tie wrapped around, because otherwise you'll hear this as you're walking through the woods. So just remember to minimize noise.
Good tip. And so here's kind of an illustration of an area that I've hunted. We're actually kind of recreating one of the recent hunts I had a few years back on a piece of public land here in central Illinois. And you can see where I ended up locating this gobbler. And you might see this road here at the bottom, Road 2350 North. That's actually not a road. It's been closed for some time. It's basically just a mowed path through there. Not really sure why it's called a road anymore or shows up here. But those are the kind of areas that I like to be able to follow. And this is, I think, a perfect example of being able to strategically access that roost without that bird ever knowing I'm there. And so I have a couple different options. I can either come in from the south and use that kind of tree or fence row that runs along that south road, or I can come in from a north parking lot and kind of do a big loop that kind of tracks all the way down here. And what I really focus on when I find a roost is trying to predict where that turkey is going to fly down from, which way he's going to leave the roost. Oftentimes, they like to stay at a similar elevation or go down. They don't typically like to fly off a roost and have to continue going up the ridge over the other side. And so I had a very good indication, a very good hunch that when this bird left this roost, that he was just going to hit this field and he was going to go out and kind of strut in the middle of this field and do his thing. And so if you look closely at this map, focus on areas that kind of funnel movement. And let's say this tom wants to leave this field. Exactly. There's a nice little funnel kind of right here. So what I consider a pinch point. And so that's the area I ended up setting in. And so you can see it's very easy to access either from the north lot or kind of this lot here on the southwest. I can get in there completely concealed and completely quiet. Now, when we get into a little bit about, now we're here, we're at the area that I want to hunt. What do I want to set up? What decoy spread? For me, a lot of it depends on which segment I drew, what time of the year it is, what the birds are doing. And so it's not always this kind of steadfast guide. But what I recommend is always start with kind of a least intimidating decoy setup. And for me, that's feeding. I may just put one hen, maybe two, just out in the field that kind of looks just like this picture here and make it look like they're feeding. I may slip a Jake decoy kind of in pursuit or kind of, checking them out from the side. And notice I said a Jake and not a Tom decoy. We kind of touched on this in 101 a little bit, but Tom decoys can be very, hit or miss, just for lack of a better term. You may have an instance where a Jake is nearby and he sees a big, mature adult Tom decoy out there. Chances of him coming in are not very good. Chances are he knows he's not the dominant bird in that area, so he has no chance at those hens because he has to get by that big Tom. Where if you use a Jake decoy, you can bring in that big, mature Tom too, or another Jake. But what I always recommend is position your decoys behind your location. And so if you look, I kind of adjusted this map just to make it a little easier to see. But you can see my location here is the X, and you can see where I placed my decoys. And I want to give you just kind of a few seconds to just kind of think why I made that decision, why I decided to put the decoys beyond myself. And there's kind of a couple different reasons. You probably guessed one. One of them is it means the Tom's going to walk right by me, in theory, hopefully, that's always the plan, and go to those decoys. Number two, and arguably I think the most important aspect of kind of this discussion, and I touched on it a little bit when we were talking about calls, turkeys are very good at locating audio. They can hear a call and pinpoint exactly where it is. Where if I have something visual for them to look at, and I'm doing, some minor calling where I, like we discussed, I'm kind of using my hand to throw that volume and throw that sound a little bit to the left, I can make sure that he is keeping his eyes on those decoys and not so much me. And so these are the kind of setups that I really look for. I try to maximize as much opportunity as I can. I have a good hunch that this bird is going to leave the roost and fly down to this field. Again, it's a similar elevation that he's already on, and they don't like to kind of go over a ridge again and then back down. And this map doesn't show it too well, but this field here on the right is pretty dense brush, as well as it's kind of a significant decline down. But when you're hunting near a roost, one of the more important aspects, and this is really one of the more important aspects of turkey hunting in general, concealment, concealment, concealment. Turkeys have some of the best eyesight that you'll ever see, especially in terms of game animals, right? And so being able to not only match the vegetation that's behind you, but also concealing your movement. And that's why, as we discussed, I'm such a big fan of diaphragm mouth calls, is because I don't have to do a ton of movement to make those vocalizations. Another big thing is your firearm movement. And so when I'm set up and ready to hunt, I'm very commonly sitting against a tree. I'll have one leg up, normally my left, especially in this kind of scenario that we just showed. And I'm going to have my shotgun the entire time pointing at where I think that bird may show up to. And it might be uncomfortable, but when it happens, I want to be in as ready of a position as I can to make as minimal movement as I can. I have a good question here. How do you approach calling in the morning and throughout the day when birds are roosted on nearby properties but not on yours? That's a fantastic question. Unfortunately, that's something I deal with a lot on the public land that I hunt, as Adam knows. There's kind of a river, and it becomes county land right on the other side of the river. And once turkey season seems to start, very commonly it pushes all of those birds from the public land over to the county side, and it becomes a little bit difficult. So what I recommend is focusing less on trying to find roosted birds at that point, especially in the area that I'm discussing. They commonly will roost on the county side, but throughout that latter portion of the morning, you'll start to notice they'll start to expand their range a little bit and start looking for those last few hens that have not been bred. Adam, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that question too.
Yeah, no, at that point, if there's not any birds, in the early mornings on the piece of property that you're able to hunt, just like Dan said, just wait. You can don't be on the line because that can be a little bit tricky sometimes, but be close to the line, and call basically, and just wait till that later part of the morning. And of course, if something does come across, let's say the private landline, make sure please that it's on the land that you can hunt before you do take a shot, and obviously be respectful. And if anything does run back onto the private land, let's say, get in touch with that landowner. But yeah, so I would say try to get close to the turkey as close as you can without encroaching onto the private land, and just gotta wait them out at that point most of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and okay, so no calling until after fly down. No,
Great
so
question.
you can call in the morning. Usually, I like to call like there's no specific time. Is basically as the sun is breaking. You'll hear in the distance, maybe you'll hear one or two gobbles. Um, I wouldn't call just yet because they're just waking up. But once the turkeys that you're hunting or you're closest to start gobbling, maybe after that first gobble, you can just give them a very little yelp. I usually, in the mornings, I call very, very, very quietly and softly. So maybe just a little, just to let them know where I am. And don't start just wailing on the call until they do fly down. But I usually keep the calling in the before when they're on the limb. I keep it minimalistic and soft,
Yep.
basically just to
I
let them know where I am and not put pressure on them. Let them decide where they're going, um, and yeah, then you can make a game plan after
Yeah,
they
I kind of follow a similar mindset to some extent. What I really focus on is I never, ever, ever want to be the first thing calling in the woods. And I don't want to be the second or third either. I like to, like Adam said, really let things wake up. And oftentimes that's probably bit me in the butt a time or two. But I think, going back to this conversation about how good at pinpointing location birds are, well, now you got to think that bird's, 40 feet up in a tree. He's got this almost aerial view, and he already knows where those hens should be. He likely watched where they went up into roost before he went up, or he went up first and watched them from there. And so if you're starting to really hit calls and they know that there's no birds on the ground yet, I haven't heard what we call a fly down cackle, which we probably should have played a vocalization for that. But a fly down cackle is essentially a loud series of cuts. And oftentimes you can hear their wings flapping. And so if you don't hear that, I don't do any loud or long sequences before that. It's always very soft. I want to hear birds hit the ground, and then I will start doing a lot more of my calling sequences. But also pay attention to how the birds are reacting. And that's one thing that's really fun about turkey hunting is there's not really a science to it. It's very much an art. You're very much trying to communicate musically with these birds, and they're all going to react completely differently. And that same bird may react to a series of calls on Tuesday, and on Thursday completely the opposite reaction happens. That happens quite frequently. And so a lot of it is just watching the reactions for the birds. If you have a tom that he flies off the roost and you're calling at him and he's not gobbling back to you and he's just strutting back and forth with a harem of hens, chances are you're not going to pull him away. And at that point, a lot of times that's when I'm just going to stop calling and I'll just kind of sit back, watch how things progress. Eventually, those hens will leave that field, and then he has to make a decision. Does he want to follow them? And at that point, that's when I'll start really calling to him. Is once those hens look like they're about to leave, I'll start yelping and be like, oh, there's another one in the corner of the field that I didn't notice. And so you may be able to draw him in that way. And so a lot of it is, again, just paying attention to how these birds react.
yes.
Now, a few likely outcomes, especially after your first roost sit, and I will say hunting the roost is very exciting. It's not the most effective way to hunt turkeys. It can be very challenging for the multitude of reasons that we've kind of laid out. But there's a few kind of outcomes that are fairly likely. The first one is the tom leaves the roost, hits the ground, and comes right to your location. If you happen to see that, you happen to see him hit the ground, he's not interested in other hens and he's gobbling every time you do a series of yelp. You'll do a couple yelps and he will almost interrupt you with gobbles. At that point, that's when I'm going to keep sweet talking him and I'm going to start kind of playing the Barry Manilow a little bit. I'm going to start doing some very soft purring that just sounds like, again, these content birds. And I'm just going to keep his interest with yelps and with purrs, in the hopes that he comes with them. Another outcome is that the tom stays with the real hens. Again, that happens often. At that point, I will try to change up my calling. And if he's still, I normally start off with yelps. And if he's just not interested, okay, I might try some clucks. If he's not interested, I might try a little more aggressive cutting with kind of a yelp sequence. And if he doesn't react to that, that's when I'm okay. That tom he's made up his mind. And if I continue calling at him, chances are I'm just gonna educate that bird. And educating the bird just means that they become aware of your presence, and it makes the rest of the day a lot harder. Another very common occurrence, and I know Adam and I talk about this a lot because it happens quite frequently, is that tom will get hung up. And this is a term that happens very often. It can happen for a multitude of different reasons. It can be maybe you made a little bit of movement. It could be that your calling sounded a little bit off. It could be your decoys are a little off. I had one decoy that I thought I staked it properly, but it was a very windy day, and that thing was just out there like a top just spinning around. And that Tom took one look at it and he just stared at it for a solid, I don't know, probably 5 minutes. And so when they hang up, that can be very frustrating. But take mental note of it and try to understand why that tom hung up in that instance, and that you can use as you continue to make other plays on birds. And that's the nice thing about turkey hunting. It's not like deer hunting where you're sitting in a stand and you're there for the day, you're there for the afternoon or the morning hunt. With turkey hunting, it's very active. So I may hunt the roost, those hens leave the field, that tom ended up following them. Okay, well, I'm packed up and I'm moving. I'm going to move a couple 100 yards. I'll start doing some calls, see if I can get another gobble. If I do, then I'm going to try to triangulate where he is, get in a position to get a decoy set up, and then start communicating with him. Now, another common occurrence is that you never see the birds after they leave the roost. That happens quite regularly, and oftentimes that's because he snuck down with those hens and they just kind of went off to their own thing, and maybe you set up in a wrong way. Now, if you never hear or never see a bird, but that you located them the night before, chances are you ended up bumping them off the roost and probably educated them a little bit. So I like to give that area a little bit of a rest, and I'll pretty much just kind of move out of that field for the rest of the day, or that area. Good question here. What is the frequency that you typically purr? I am almost purring nonstop. I may take some breaths, but that's really about it for me. For me, it's once I find something that lures that tom and that really grabs his attention, I don't want to stop for whatever reason. I don't want to give him a chance to change his mind. Yeah. So I am constantly purring. And again, like I mentioned, I do all my purring with a mouth call. And so that way I don't really have to move much. And when I'm hunting, this mouth call just sits in the side of my mouth. And so whenever I need it, I can just quickly move it up into place and start purring. And then you can move it right back into the side of your mouth, and you still have kind of all that flexibility.
Yes.
But great question. Okay, so now we get to probably the most frustrating part of turkey hunting. I'll kind of let Adam take it away here and talk about henned up toms.
Yep. So henned up toms, basically, I mean, we've kind of touched on what that looks like. It'll be one tom out in the field with his harem of hens. And basically, this happens a lot during the earlier part of the season. So like segment 1, 2, and maybe into segment 3, depending on, that year and the weather and whatnot. But basically, this is their breeding season. So the one thing on their mind is to fly down from the roost every morning, get with their hens, mate, move on to the next hen, because obviously they're trying to just reproduce and make more turkeys. So it's hard, again, like Dan had mentioned, to break those birds away from their hens. A lot of times, again, early season, like segment 1, 2, and into 3, you're going to be wanting to wait for those mid-morning birds, because they're going to just be done with the group of hens that they've been with all throughout the morning since fly down till about 10:30. Sometimes it's literally on the dot. Like, you'll look at your phone or your watch and you'll hear a gobble at 10:30. It's kind of funny how it works.
It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that later in the morning part of the day is going to be your best friend when the toms are henned up. And I'm sure we'll get into it here in the next couple of slides, but that changes a little bit as the season goes.
Yeah, and what I really like to focus on when there's a henned up tom, So a hand up tom, like Adam mentioned, it means he's with hens, and it is very hard to pull a bird away from live hens. You have a couple plastic ones over here that aren't moving around much, and he's got 5 or 6 that he's been familiar with. But what I like to say is, at that point, forget about the tom. Avoid the just get the tom out of your mind and focus on those hens. If you can agitate those hens and get them, especially what we consider the boss hen, and so that's kind of the dominant female in an area or in a small flock or in a family group. If you can get her agitated, she may come over and actually start to try to tussle to some extent. And so my strategy for that is kind of what it says here. Anytime she talks, I'm talking. Anytime she yelps, I'm going to cut her off, and I'm going to try to be a little bit louder, and I'm going to try to do the exact same vocalizations that she does. And you'll be able to watch them react, and that hen will start getting so ticked off that she'll start really yelping at an agitated pace. It'll be very loud, and if you just continue that, the theory is that will then bring her, which in that case will bring the tom.
Yeah, and you'll be able to identify the quote unquote boss hen out of the group if you just sit there and listen. That will be the hen that just will not shut up. He just is constantly yelping, just yelp, 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 just constantly yelping. And so, a good, like Dan just said, when you're going to want to mimic whatever noises, whatever sequence and whatever calls she's making, you're going to want to mimic those exact ones but louder. And a good way to get her fired up or ticked off at you is to cut her off with some of those clucks or kind of cuts. So if she's in the middle of yelping like yelp, 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 and you hit her with a couple and then start going into the yelps exactly like she's doing, that's just going to make her think that that you're looking for a fight and bring her in, just like Dan said.
Another way that you can kind of address this, especially if it's later in the season, kind of like Adam talked about, you may see henned up, or not later in the season, but earlier in the season, you may see a lot of henned up birds. It may become very common, and something you can do to kind of address that outside of trying to mimic the boss hen, or in addition to that, is to set up your decoys in a very aggressive manner. And so what I find to be the most aggressive, you can certainly try to make a fighting display. I find that throws toms off, or not so much toms, but jakes off a lot. If you're trying to mimic a fight, they don't typically want much part of that, especially the younger males. But if you make it look like there's a tom that's actively breeding a female, that can really agitate that tom, especially if he feels like he is the maturest bird in the area, and that is his hen. That's one of his hens from his harem. Then chances are he's going to come in hot. He's going to come in fired up, and he's going to try to essentially kick the snot out of that other tom or your decoy. Now, kind of like we said, we're moving on to mid-morning. You hunted the roost. It didn't pan out. So what's the next steps? And we kind of talked a little bit about this, but I want to really kind of hammer in some of the strategies that I personally utilize and that Adam does as well. For me, a lot of it, especially latter portion of the day, I want to try to get in areas, because ideally we don't really know where the birds are at this point, right? That roost fly down has already happened. There's birds kind of scattered all across the landscape. They're doing their own thing. And so what I like to do, if I'm struggling, that morning roost didn't pan out, I try to find a nice big ridge, get at the top of it, and just send vocalizations into the abyss. That's where a box call, where I personally use a box call a lot, is when I'm on top of a ridge. I don't really know, I don't have an idea of where birds are. I'll rip a sequence on that box call at the top of the ridge that will kind of go out and disperse in quite a good distance. And chances are you'll hear a gobble. Whether or not it's a bird that you can actually make a play on, it might be a bird that's half mile away or so, but it can be a very, very effective strategy for that. Any other thoughts for mid-morning from you, Adam? Oh, good question here. Is it always just one tom? Do you mean in terms of my decoy placement or in terms of just overall hunting? Because there are instances where you'll have multiple toms come in. And that's why you'll see a lot of hunters actually hunt in pairs, especially in turkey season. You'll have one or two hunters together. And that's in cases like that. If we go back to, a picture like this, if you have a tom, two toms come in and you shoot one, and that tom is obviously still kind of kicking around, the muscles are still kind of twitching, and there's still some caloric energy in there, that other tom is likely going to start beating up your harvested carcass that's laying on the ground. That's a very common occurrence. So oftentimes, again, people will hunt in pairs just for that sole fact that if you have two toms come in, you shoot one, chances are that other one is not going to leave. Sometimes they might bolt, but very commonly that gunshot noise is so loud that they don't really know what it is or where it came from, and so they're just kind of starstruck, and then it goes away, and they just kind of go back to, and then, oh, there's a tom over there that's flopping around. Let's go beat on him, and they'll start hitting them with their wings and kicking them with their spurs. I would not say two toms is common. Um,
It all just depends, honestly. In
yeah,
some spots, you might have three toms hanging out together. That's not too common in the spring. It's common later in the season, more so when they kind of cool off, and the heavy part of the breeding season's kind of coming towards an end. But it certainly does happen. Like Dan said, kind of the rumor is if there's multiple toms in a group, let's say two, the first one that's coming in or the one that's leading is going to be usually the dominant bird. So that's kind of where that happens. If you shoot that first one, um, that second less dominant bird might again beat up on him just because he's establishing dominance now. I don't know if they know that Tom just
right.
uh, ate some dirt, but I don't know how that works exactly. But it's almost like he's reestablishing the pecking order, and just showing that he's the dominant one now. So yeah, that does happen, but there's no rhyme or reason. Sometimes there's two to three toms. Sometimes you're just dealing with one single.
Yeah, a lot of it just depends on the population dynamics of that specific site.
Mm-hmm.
But good question, great question. Now, this is something we're all going to have to deal with is hunting in adverse weather, especially in the spring. We have a lot of rain. Sometimes we get, random cold blast. I remember, was it 2 years ago, Adam? We had a first season hunt, which we're approaching within the next week or two, depending on what zone you're in. And we had about an inch or two of snow on opening day of turkey season. And that made things a little bit challenging. So we're just going to kind of discuss how to hunt in some of these inclement weather conditions, especially in Illinois. As we all know, when you draw up the turkey permit, you might get 5 or 6 days to hunt, and you're only hunting from sunrise to one. That's when the season closes for the day. And so we want to try to highlight even some of those days that the weather may not be the best. You can still have a very productive hunt. And I will say right off the bat, I know it kind of says here, calm, sunny mornings usually provide the best action. For the style that I hunt personally, I would much prefer a drizzly, rainy day any day over a bright, sunny day. And we'll kind of get into why in a little bit. But what we first should mention is we get a ton of rain in Illinois throughout April and May. Now, rain can cause the birds to become a little bit quieter. They may not be as active, especially if it's a cold rain. You may actually see, I don't want to say a pause in breeding behavior, but it'll certainly not be as intense almost. It kind of seems to just kind of slow down a little bit. They're still going to be, doing their own thing. The females still have to be out there feeding and trying to eat insects to get as much protein as they can for their egg development. And so a lot of times that's where I'm focusing my efforts in the rain, are these big open fields that have short grasses. Remember, turkeys don't like to walk through tall grasses. The females will need to nest in prairie grasses, but if they're out there feeding, they prefer to be in short grass. They don't want to walk in grass that's typically touching their chest. But that's very common to to see a lot of activity in some of these open, small fields.
Yeah, look for burned areas in the
Burned
springtime.
areas are great, yeah, especially recent burns. And I was actually out at a couple DNR sites the past few weekends, and they've been doing a lot of burning. It seems like last weekend was, I don't know if it was last weekend or the weekend before. All my days are running together, but there was a couple good days of low wind and decent humidity that they got a lot of prescribed burns done on these sites. And like Adam said, those are excellent. And you may ask kind of why. I would actually have kind of a question to that effect. You are going to see so much diversity come green up in these burned areas that it's night and day. There still will be a little bit of char, but in the next few weeks they are going to green up, and that's going to pull in so many different insects, especially because these burns are often in prairie grasses with a lot of wildflowers, and so you're starting to see a lot of diversity come up, and that can really pull in these turkeys to feed in these areas.
And it exposes the soil. They get
You're right.
worms, bugs. Yeah, burned areas are like they're crucial to turkey habitat and survival. The whole 9 yards. Burned areas are like super crucial for turkey survival.
But back to rain a little bit. Obviously, I do want to mention just for clarification and safety's sake, if it's lightning and thundering, I'm out of there. That's one thing I don't want to mess with. So I don't touch too much lightning. So just kind of keep that in mind. But the biggest advantage that I find when you're hunting in the rain is it really knocks down your noise, right? And so you can cover a lot of ground. And I will actually alter my strategies to, instead of this run and gun style where I'll go try to cut off a bird. Maybe I locate a tom, in the middle of the day at 10:30, 11 o'clock. I think he's following this ridge, running west. Normally, on a nice sunny day, I might try to make a big loop, get in front of him, get some decoys set up in front of him. Where on a wet day, I might actually take the opposite approach, and I might start trying to just follow him and see if I get to a point where I can either get it. I've never gotten close, I'll just say that, in terms of stalking him, but oftentimes you'll be able to locate which field he enters and just kind of follow right behind him. And that's when I'll let him get to the opposite side of the field, and then I'll put decoys right where he just came from, and I'll start calling to him. And then it almost looks like these hens were following him, just like what happens in nature. You can do that in non-rainy days too, but it's a lot more difficult just because the sound isn't dampened, especially those crunchy leaves and stuff like that.
Yeah, I do want to point out just a kind of tip that a lot of turkey hunters say during when it's raining. Of course, not torrential, but if it's like drizzling mild rain, turkeys really like to be out in the open because it's hard for them to hear in the woods when the rain is hitting leaves and all that stuff.
Yeah,
So they like to
for
be
clarification, this should not say reduces. This should say increases.
yes, um, and in the wind. Really, the worst possible kind of weather for turkey hunting, which we're about to get into, is super windy days because they can't hear each other. Rain, again, doesn't affect them too terribly. They just might change their locations where they're going to want to be for the day.
But like Adam said, I kind of want to reiterate that because it's such an impactful point. Is thinking about the bird, thinking about what that animal uses to avoid predators. And for turkeys, it's their eyesight. And when everything is rainy, everything's quiet, they can't really rely on any hearing, that they kind of normally do as well. So they're going to get in the open fields and they're just going to rely on that eyesight because that's still effective. But when you have a windy day and everything out there is blowing around and is moving back and forth, they're not going to want to be in those open fields because visually everything is moving, and that's how they pick up predators and detect danger, is by sensing movement in calm areas. And so if everything's moving, it becomes a little bit detrimental. So what I like to personally do on very windy days, if it's super windy, 35 to 50, I'm probably going to sleep in, just to be honest. But if it's kind of a normal day, 15, maybe with some 25-mile-per-hour gusts, I will try to find the leeward side. And so let's imagine you have, a ridge and the wind is coming from this direction. I'm going to try to find areas on the downwind side they're really protected. And you'll see a lot of activity starting to naturally funnel into these lowland areas that have some type of wind protection.
Yep. And if you're having trouble figuring that out, there's nothing wrong with just going for basically a hike.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if all of a sudden you
100%.
come into a spot that's, some pocket where you're like all of a sudden like, whoa, it's not windy here, just slow down, do some light calling, and you'll be surprised. There could be, turkeys in your approximate area right there. So there's no there's no specific way to turkey hunt. A lot of the times that I'm doing it is I'll try to set up on the roost in the morning. If that works, great. If that fails, which usually it's hard to do a roost hunt, basically I just go on a hike and just every so often call just out into the woods and see if I get a response. So
Yeah, I do the same thing. I might take, that first hour or so after the roost, I actually oftentimes will bring a cup of coffee and a little propane, backpacking stove, and I may heat up a cup of coffee and relax for the morning for a little bit. You'll still be able to hear gobbles going off and just enjoy the morning. And then I'll get back into it, at about 8 o'clock and give those roosted birds some time, because I don't want to immediately start pushing them, because then you're just going to expand their range and they may just kind of disperse. But
and this
yeah.
kind of goes back to, just quickly want to touch on it. If you get one tag in Illinois, if you get lucky to draw one for public land, let's say, and you get 5 days, you have from whatever 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. to hunt. So that's 7 hours maybe, and if you only get to hunt the weekend, that's 14 hours of turkey hunting. So you better just enjoy the morning, stay out there as long as you can, and obviously the longer you're in the woods, the more success you're gonna have. So
Yep. Yep. But again, kind of continuing along the same trend about adverse weather, I kind of mentioned this a little bit ago, but lightning is very dangerous. We have about 10 people get struck in Illinois per year. But the cool thing about, excuse me, turkey hunting, especially with distant thunder, I like to really enjoy it from the comfort of my car. Crack the window down, and every time there's a big clap of thunder, you will just hear gobble 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 all around, and it's pretty cool. So again, that thunder kind of creates that same shock gobble response, and some people actually even call them thunder chickens, is what they call turkey. But again, we may actually, especially if you have a very early, season tag, you may get the chance to hunt in snow, which is a very unique opportunity. I will say that flat out. Hunting spring turkey season in the snow is about as unique as it gets. It will slow down breeding activity a little bit, but you have the ability to very quickly figure out where these birds are going on an hour by hour basis, right? Let's say it snowed last night and you're out there this morning. If you find turkey tracks, that turkey was this morning. Chances are it probably wasn't last night after they flew up to the roost. So chances are that was that morning, and you can start to follow those tracks, and eventually you can make a play on a bird that way. I've done it a few times. I've had one successful hunt where I actually did harvest one in the snow, but that's very few and far between. But it can be pretty exciting when you do get the opportunity. So just kind of to summarize some of these adverse weather tactics, and I really want to point out this picture here. We talked a little bit about breaking up your background and breaking up the image, and this is how I turkey hunt. When I'm hunting on the edge of a field, I'm never sitting on the very edge. I'm usually like probably 5 to 7 yards inside of the edge, so I still have some of that nice young edge growth right in front of me that helps conceal some of my movements, helps break up my silhouette, and you can really get hidden pretty quickly. Now, I will say, when you're setting up, be conscious of the sun too. You don't want to be looking directly in the sunrise. Obviously, that's not very comfortable, but also it allows them to pick up on any movement, especially the little glare of your gun. You can see here in this picture on the right, it's not a very shiny gun, but you can see a little bit of glare coming off that action at the pump. And that little bit of glare, if you're moving that firearm, they can pick up on that. And so I personally, usually, if I can, like to have the sun at my back and make the turkeys have to look in the sun. And so when they see me, there's a big bright light behind me, and it again just kind of helps conceal my movement a little bit. But kind of summing up adverse weather, this is kind of the biggest key takeaway here is switch to more passive hunting and ambush. So again, I'm not focusing on some of that breeding behavior because it usually slows down a little bit. I might try to ambush style. What I like to do, especially on rainy days, we talked about how common it is to see them in big open fields. I do a lot of let's call it kind of Western style glassing, where I'll get up on a ridge, take out my binoculars, and just scan any open expanse that I can see and see if I can pick up on any birds. And then I can develop a plan to hopefully go in and kind of make a play on them. Some good thing for weather. We kind of highlighted, the concept of these pot calls, especially the slate ones, that they do not work when they get wet. Even your finger oil, even if you just spill a little Dasani water on your call, that will make it basically non-functional until it dries out. And so they do make crystal versions like you can see here, or you have your standard mouth call. Most box calls also do suffer from kind of water, but they do make a few water. Do you have a waterproof one, Adam?
I do. I do. I picked that one up really quick. I should have got
But they also make some with a coating that still allow them to function with the wall, or with the wall, the function with water. So that's definitely something to think about as you're making a decision on a call.
Yep, I think this one's called the Primos Wet Box, and it's more of like instead of chalk, it's kind of like a lacquer. Um, so it is waterproof. So
Yeah.
just do some research and see. It's
And
always good to have at least one call that you can use.
it is. I highly recommend at least having one, whether you get a slate call that can function, or not a slate, a pot call that can function in wet, or a box call that can function with wet. I at least recommend getting one of those. Good point, Adam. A couple of other additional tips. Always shoot the birds when their head is up. We kind of talked about this when we talked about the cluck a little bit, and how important and how good of a vocalization that is to just get that neck completely straightened out. Because when they're strutting, that neck is really pulled in tight, and you're losing a lot of that targeted area that you want to try to hit. You're losing those vitals. They're all just kind of tucked in, and it's very condensed and hard to hit. And so we want to make sure that get that neck nice and straight up and get a nice, accurate, and ethical shot.
Not only that, but it does help for not ruining the meat as well.
That too, yeah, it's a huge one. Yeah. Yeah. And also, if you want to get the bird mounted, a lot of times people will wait. You can see Adam here in this picture, that tail fan is perfectly straight. Very common, especially on the birds I shoot. I normally have 2 or 3 feathers out of the tail that's gone, because very commonly, if they're facing directly at you when you shoot, even if they're full strut and they're starting to come down, some of those pellets may still impact some of the tail feathers. And so if that's something you're concerned about, or interested in trying to protect, just make sure that you're making sure that tail is out of its headway. And I think this is probably the most important aspect of turkey hunting. And it's one of those things that's very hard to teach or explain, but don't overcall. And I know we say that after we just spent 45 minutes talking about turkey calling, but less is more a lot of times. These birds, especially on public land, they are going to become call shy towards the latter portion of the season. They've been called at, they've seen decoys, and they're starting to get educated. And sometimes during the latter portion of the season, I might even put my calls away and just rely on decoys, or I may put my decoys away and just rely on calls. And so oftentimes just kind of trying different things, and you'll know pretty quickly if that tom comes in, he sees your decoys, you're not calling, and he just turns around and goes the other way. Okay, that didn't work. I'm going to go back to calling. That happens very, very frequently. I don't know. On average, I would say I probably have, I don't know, 3 or 4 plays on every bird for every one I harvest. I think is probably about accurate. I don't know what your rate would be, Adam, but off the top of my head, it's very common to have unsuccessful setups.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to come up with a rate, but
Yeah.
it's just each bird is its own unique situation. Let's just put it that way. You might be able to get 3 or 4 situations out of one single bird, or he might come in that first time. It's just you start learning obviously with more experience.
And they're not always going to gobble. I was out with a new hunter. Oh, it was probably 2 years ago on a piece of public land, and we roosted a bird. Heard this tom fly down. He got with some hens, and we started talking to that tom. He gave us a couple gobbles, and he worked our way for a little bit, and then he just went back to his hens and worked off. And I kept trying to call at him just a little bit to see if I could just at least get some interest back. And then all of a sudden I hear it's hard to explain, but it's called a drum. It almost sounds, it's boom, but it's a sound that's very hard to explain. It's a sound that you don't necessarily hear it, you more feel it. And I heard it from like 5 yards behind me. And this other Jake had, or this other Tom had just been quiet the whole day. I was calling, and next thing I know, he's 5 yards behind me. And so you don't always hear gobbles. So if you're not hearing gobbles, that doesn't necessarily mean there's not turkey there. Just kind of keep that in mind.
Yep. We did have a question from Kari. What strategies would you use for fourth and fifth season? Anything different? Um, I would say I always still start off with a roost hunt. You know,
Yep.
that's my main tactic in the first thing that I would do. And again, it just depends on behavior. If the roost hunt doesn't work, I kind of just leave that area, try to go again, just go on a hike. And a lot of times later in the season, like fourth and fifth season, you might not hear as frequent gobbles. Um, but a lot of times those turkeys are just looking for that, you know, couple last hens that they can breed through, you know, through that later part of the season. So they might not be as vocal, but they're easier to call in. So maybe setting up in one good, you know, open field with your decoys out in front of you and just giving that, you know, calling every 15, 20 minutes. Let's say you don't hear anything and you just don't know where to go and what to do. I would, you know, try to find a good field to where maybe you've seen turkeys in the past. You know, get in a good covered spot, put your
Or
decoys
if you
out.
haven't even seen them there, you can see kind of the short grass field that Adams harvested this bird in here. That's the kind of
Mhm.
fields I'm looking
Yep,
for.
yep. And just wait it out. I would just sit in one spot maybe for, you know, a couple, you know, an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the day, and just call every 15, 20 minutes and just see what happens. If not, if that doesn't work, then just pick everything up and try another location, you know, maybe 500 yards the other way or the next field over.
And
Um,
I will say we kind of touched on this a little bit in 101, but my if I had an ideal season to pick, I know Adam and I kind of differ a little bit, but similar kind of theories. I would honestly pick a fourth and fifth season over first, for a few different reasons. Obviously, this year we're a little bit below average temps, and so we may see that breeding behavior pushed back a little bit. So the first season may not be as good as it is, the past few years. And I find the fourth and fifth season to be very effective at just harvesting a bird. If you're not interested in, going after that mature tom, which I'm not necessarily, I just want to get a bird in the freezer. That's when I really like the fourth and fifth season. It can be very productive. The mature toms have usually bred the majority of the hens that are able to be bred or receptive to be bred, and they're really going to start expanding their range, and they're really, like Adam said, going to start searching for other hens. And that's when it can be advantageous to get in a field like Adam kind of is illustrating here in this short grass field that's kind of surrounded by forest. Put a couple decoys in a nice visible spot and just kind of hunker along the edge of that. And like he said, just call every few minutes, and you may be surprised. You may not hear a gobble, and all of a sudden that Tom comes just walking out. And oftentimes, especially in the fourth and fifth season, the later portion of the whole season, they're a little bit quieter. They're a little bit more, they've been pressured, right? It's kind of like deer. They start to adjust their behaviors. They notice, things are in the woods, their friends are getting shot or whatever. And so oftentimes the fourth and fifth can be very good for that.
yes. We had another question about thermal scopes.
Good question. I think you actually asked that the other day. I emailed the local conservation police officer for our area. I have not heard back yet, but I dug into the wildlife code a little bit, and I don't see any reason it would be considered prohibited. So I don't think you'd have really any issue with that at all. A few additional tips: do not be afraid to hunt without decoys. You do not have to have decoys. In fact, in the fourth and fifth season, I have found it to be better in some cases to not, especially. I'll take it a step back. If you're in an area where you're just trying to find birds, I would probably use decoys, just at least try to get them to look at your setup. But if you're in an area that birds are there, you may want to try without decoys and just set up in an area that has vegetation behind you. And those toms, they will think there's a bird in there, and they will come and try to investigate. So find an area that you don't want to just be sitting against a tree and have a mowed grass field behind you and start calling without decoys. But if you can set up in a place that if there were birds behind you that they would not be visible anyway, then that can be a really good strategy.
Yeah, kind of the rule of thumb I always think about for that would be if you know the area that you're hunting and it's super wide open, decoys are probably going to be your friend. If you're hunting, mostly timber that has a lot of, invasive species like bush honeysuckle or something like that, that you can kind of get more up close and personal and kind of really hide and seek with the turkey, decoys won't be necessary at that point. Not always, if they can still help. But yeah, that just comes with a little bit of scouting, usually, of what area you're going to be hunting.
Yeah, and we've talked quite a bit about hunting these open spaces. Turkeys don't always, breed and do this breeding behavior in open spaces. They will do it in forested areas if the habitat's conducive. A lot of the public sites around here are full of bush honeysuckle and are kind of gnarly and nasty towards the ground level, and so it doesn't make it as conducive for a turkey to be out there strutting. Because remember, he wants to be seen. He wants to get out in that field and show off his stuff. But you can also find areas that maybe it's an old logging road that goes through a forest. I have harvested several turkeys on old logging roads. Just as he comes strutting down that logging road, he probably thinks there's some hens, off feeding in this timber stand, and so he's just out there in an open area, walking up and down that old logging road. So it's not always some of these open areas, but those are what I tend to gravitate to, especially the first couple hunts of a year. A few other tips. Don't forget your sandpaper or scratch pad for your call. We kind of talked about chalk a little bit for the box call, but for a slate or pot call, you also need a little scratch pad that creates the lines that allow that friction to be used. And I should say with a mouth call, yeah, there's a nice scratch
Yeah,
pad.
usually if you buy a pot call, it comes
It
with like a
comes with
little
it.
Brillo pad or a little piece of sandpaper.
Yeah, and I like these mouth calls. They normally come with a little clear plastic case like this. I always throw a few toothpicks in this. I'll kind of break them in half and throw them in here. And when I'm not using this, maybe I'm eating lunch or eating breakfast, I will take toothpicks and put them between the reeds of this latex call, and that will allow you to essentially keep them from getting stuck together, right? If you just let it sit and just kind of let it dry out naturally and it doesn't get airflow all the way inside those reeds, they might stick together. It will start to grow mold and mildew and become pretty nasty. So that's a good tip and something I always carry with me.
Yeah, and when you're home, you can always rinse them in some mouthwash, is usually how I do it. Don't keep them in there because it can dissolve the latex or the glue that holds it together, but just give them a little rinse or something.
All right, we've got a really good question from Dave. How many hunts have you shot and missed, but ended up shooting a turkey later in the day? I know off the top of my head, I've done it once, and I think we kind of touched on it on 101 a little bit. But when I on this hunt that I'm thinking of, I had a tom that was way too close, right? And so when you're using a shotgun, I was using a 12 gauge with a full turkey choke, which is an extra full, so you have a very tight pattern. And that bird was at about 7-8 yards, and I was probably 18 or 19 at the time. And I didn't really think about the spread of my shot at that point. And so, at that distance, you're basically shooting a single projectile at the head of a bird, with iron sights, or with what I was using was just a shotgun with a single bead at the front. So I ended up missing that bird completely. Who knows where that shot went, but it kind of sailed right over his head. And I ended up harvesting a young Jake probably an hour and a half later.
Yes, it's shooting a shotgun doesn't. It'll scare the bird away that's right in front of you most of the time, but it won't scare birds that are in the vicinity or like a couple 200-300 yards away. So yeah, if you do miss, just collect yourself.
Which is
Uh,
hard.
yes, which is hard. Obviously, missing is never fun. I did a lot of that last year. Um, but in the slide before, it said one of the points said always bring extra shells with you. That is always crucial because missing turkeys can be fairly common. Um, I mean, their heads are pretty small and they're always moving around. And like Dan said, if you're off on your if you're holding your shotgun just a little bit crooked, or if you're not totally ready, and they're close, it can be fairly easy to miss. So bring extra shells, compose yourself, reload, probably stay quiet for a little bit,
Hmm.
um, and then just again move on. Go, go walk a little bit and just start lightly calling again. And
Yeah.
you never know,
Try
you
to
might
figure out
get
what
that
went
same.
wrong. And
Yeah, you might have just startled that bird. Maybe he just ran 100 yards and all of a sudden, saw a hen and he went back to strutting. So you always can have another, chance at that same bird.
that's a great question, though. And one thing you can do, depending on your personal finances or whatever, one common trend that I've seen a lot, and I may actually look into it, not for this coming season, but next season, is putting a red dot scope on one of my shotguns. Normally you're not getting a ton of magnification, but the shotgun I use is also my waterfowl gun, and so I'm probably different than most recreational or hunters or shooters. I honestly take both beads off my shotgun now, and so I'm basically just shooting a smooth rail all the way down, and that can become difficult to try to aim at a static image. I find it a lot easier for me to pick up moving targets with it, so I will probably look to put a red dot scope on it, just again, not so much for the magnification, but just to allow me to get a nice accurate sight picture and to really be able to put that shot where I need to and where I want to.
Yeah, like Dan just said, I mean, most of the time when you're thinking of shooting a shotgun, um, when you have a pheasant flying by or a duck, or even if you're just, shooting clay pigeons, you're not aiming down, right? It's a lot more instinctive, right? Wherever that bird or that clay pigeon is going, you're kind of following it, and then you shoot. It's a lot different when you're just trying to aim down the barrel of a shotgun. It just can feel a little bit
Yeah,
unnatural if you're not used to it.
it really can. Yeah.
Mhm.
But just to kind of wrap up a little bit, continue to hunt throughout the day. I know we've kind of beat on this drum about this late morning portion of the hunt, but I see so many people when I'm out on some of these public sites. I'll show up an hour before sunrise and there's 15 cars, right, or however many cars are at that site, and then I'll come back at 8 or 9 o'clock. Sometimes I forgot something in the car, and half the vehicles are already gone, and I may have heard one shot all morning. And I think you're doing a real disservice to yourself by not sticking out there a little bit longer and enjoying what I find to be the most successful part of the turkey season. And just to kind of continue along this trend, I normally try to make a day out of it. Obviously, the site I hunt is about an hour ish and some change from my house, and so when I go out there, I prefer to stay the entire day rather than hunt till 1, come back home for an hour or two, and then have to drive all the way back out there to do some late roosting. So what can you do? You can look for morels, you can go fishing, you can just take a nap and enjoy the place. But I highly recommend just kind of sticking out there, even if you can't be legally hunting. Go put your firearm away. Get changed, do whatever you want to do. But just being out there, even after 1 o'clock, there's been times where I've seen turkeys, at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and I go, huh, I bet I know where he's going to roost, and I bet I can already, make a plan for tomorrow's hunt. So it doesn't have to just be by roosting. Sometimes just being out there and looking at some of these large expanses of land can be quite fruitful. And again, the more you turkey hunt, the better you're going to be, and the less equipment you're going to realize you need. I know when I first started turkey hunting, I used to carry, I even hate to say it, but three hen decoys and a full tom at that point, and you don't need that much. You certainly can use it, but being comfortable and not having to strain yourself just to cover some ground is very important with turkey hunting. We've kind of reiterated, but keep it simple. It's very active. It's going to be a lot of movement, and having less equipment can be a nice benefit. Can I melee a turkey? You can certainly try, but I guarantee you, you're not going to catch them. uh, I actually, kind of a side note, but prior to graduating college, one of my jobs as a summer intern was working as a wild turkey trapping technician in northern Missouri up near Mark Twain Lake. And so how this worked is we would have a bait pile out, and we'd have a what we call a rocket net. And so it's this long net that's about 60 feet wide by about 30 feet, or 60 feet long by about 30 feet wide. And we'd let the turkeys get on bait, and then we would launch this giant net. with explosives, and it would rocket over top of them and gently set down, and that would allow us to capture them and then put bands on them and things. But there was a couple instances where, when you're trying to wrestle them out of the net and they try to get away, I tell you what, you don't want to try to grab a turkey when it's moving. They have some pretty big spurs, and that can do some serious damage.
Yes. Not only that, but their reaction time is
Oh,
very
it
fast,
is.
and it's kind of crazy. You'll see a Tom go into full strut, and he'll look like this big, puffed out butterball turkey. And if you make one quick movement or something, if he catches something, he'll go to the slimmest profile and basically look like a bullet running across the field at
And
like
they look
30
like a
miles
road
an hour.
runner. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
So
It is insane how fast they are.
yes.
But one thing we always like to point out is the National Wild Turkey Federation. We talked about some of the impacts that this relocation of wild turkeys, in the mid 1900s has had on the populations. We used to not have turkeys, and a lot of that is due to Illinois DNR, as well as groups like the National Wild Turkey Federation, who champion those efforts and who does a lot of really good work at increasing turkey habitat across the country, but also a lot in Illinois. So their kind of motto is save the habitat and save the hunt, and so that's what they really focus on. But what I like to point out is they have local chapters all across the state. I'm actually on the committee for the local Champaign County chapter. We had our banquet a few months back now at this point. But it's a great way to just meet like-minded people, especially if you're struggling to find land access. A lot of these guys are older, as well as women, and they've been in this state hunting turkeys for a long time. They know almost every landowner in their area. You can drive around, oh, that's Betty Lou's house. It used to be owned by, Bilbo back in the day. He sold it in 19, they have this really good history of the area. And typically they can help kind of guide you and make some connections that may allow you to gain access. So I highly recommend either getting the national membership, which gets you some cool stuff. You get a monthly magazine that talks, turkey tips, talks turkey ecology, turkey behavior, as well as a couple other things. So definitely look into the National Wild Turkey Federation. It's a great organization. Couple other upcoming events, or I guess one, we have a few more that are going to be added to the calendar here in a few weeks or a few days. But this weekend on Saturday, we are heading up to Moraine Hill State Park. We've got a couple turkey carcasses that we're going to bring out, show how to process. We're going to cook it up. I think we're making turkey schnitzel, turkey gravy, and then turkey nuggets. Is that right, Adam?
I believe so.
Yeah, so we're going to have a little tasting, show you how to, field dress, how to butcher a turkey after your harvest, and go through all of those steps. So if you're in the area and interested in attending that, feel free to register, and we'd be happy to see you on Saturday. But other than that, we want to give a huge thanks to you guys coming out tonight. We hope to see you in the turkey woods in the next few weeks, and send us some stories, send us questions. We're happy to help, happy to answer as much as we can. So we've got a few minutes. We kind of ran way over on time. Sorry about that. We'll give just a few minutes for a few questions if you have any. But if not, thanks for coming out tonight, and we'll talk at you later. Thanks, Kari. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll sing some turkeys goodbye.
Thank you, Brian.
Have a good evening. Kiki, I'll try one more time.
Thanks, Chris. Dave. That's a good Kiki right there.
It takes me a while to get my mouth in the right
Mm-hmm.
shape, and once I get it there, it's okay. But it's a matter of getting there. Sounds good. See you on Saturday. All right, appreciate it, guys. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Dan, are you there?